Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. Well, I'm really super excited to have Irfan Ali with NVIDIA. He is the global head of Edge Solution Sales. And in today's episode, we're going to cover a very fascinating topic. Everybody talks about AI in all kinds of ways, but there's a massive opportunity for all the service providers worldwide to monetize their edges by bringing in GPUs to those edges, loading in AI models, very specific AI models that then becomes, an easy way for the enterprise to just attach those models and not have to build it or run it, and have working with the service providers and their partners bring those models into market. So with that, I want to bring and introduce Irfan Ali to the show. And Irfan, welcome to Executives of the Edge. And if you can, for our listeners, talk a little about yourself and your background and really what your role is at NVIDIA and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, Pascal, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Irfan Ali, I'm the Edge segment sales lead globally for NVIDIA, and I'm responsible for all of our Edge AI inferencing solutions that we have, both in hardware and software. I've been covering Edge with IoT and other, digital transformation initiatives for the past 30 years. So it's an area that is very dear to my heart, and I think that's where I'm helping champion here at NVIDIA.
Oh yeah, thank you, Irfan. And I think for everybody in the listeners, everybody knows what NVIDIA is, so that's what we need to explain what NVIDIA does. But there's a lot happening with AI, and it's so many areas. But I think you're responsible for the edge. So can you give us a little bit of background? Where do you see the opportunities for NVIDIA at the edge? At MEF, we have a lot of service providers, our members, some vendors, GSIs. What's the opportunity for them at the edge? Because they have a lot of edges. They have a lot of POPs and sites and CP edges and all kinds of edges. So how do you see the edges?
Well, it's a very, very loaded question. I think, first of all, let me define what we mean by edge, right? I think, so what I do as a scope of my role is, when we say edge, we mean anything that is deployed from an inferencing standpoint outside the cloud and the data center environment. So if you're in a cloud provider, or if you have a large data centers, those are very controlled environments, and that's not where where NVIDIA is looking to grow the accelerated computing and our AI inferencing is in those in-field, embedded near edge type solutions that we manage, and that's what I drive. So the opportunity really is to sort of democratize AI outside the cloud into all these different use cases that we may have that are taking advantage of being closer to the data to do the inferencing of that, so that they can take advantage of that very perishable data. A lot of the data that sometimes makes it to the cloud has already gone to a lot of meta tagging and summarization. If you want to take real-time access to data, you have to deploy at the edge. And we find that enterprises over the last 3 or 4 years have become more comfortable with what AI can do for them and how they can deploy AI. They've done multiple POCs, and now we're scaling this. Now we're seeing this emergence of enterprises wanting to deploy in production at scale, and that's where service providers really come in, and their ability to service that for customers that may not have a large infrastructure, or they need infrastructure as a service. Or they don't have the technical capabilities to be able to stand up on infrastructure like that. I think service providers have a unique opportunity. So I think that's what's exciting about this, our dialogue here today.
So I think what I think we were saying is there's training within the big data centers, and they're massive, massive clusters of compute and GPUs from NVIDIA, and that is one thing. But then there's inference, and what you're talking about is that normally is latency sensitive. And so edges play a very important role to reduce those latencies. And there are many, many, many use cases and many revenue opportunities as AI continues to evolve. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, I think inference can be done in the cloud. Don't get me wrong. So there's if you look at industries like financial services and these hyperscalers, they do a lot of inferencing from recommender engines and theft prevent, fraud detection, all in the cloud. That doesn't have to be at edge, let's say. But if you're in retail, if you're in manufacturing, smart spaces like smart cities, medical devices, all that is typically done at the edge. So, and that's where we're seeing an emergence of these use cases at the edge.
So what are these use cases that you see? So I think you and I have had a lot of discussions, computer vision, you talk about very, very passionately, but right. I think everybody wants to know, like, what are these use cases? Some examples would go through of where AI is going to play a very significant role.
Well, I think so the technologies that are driving us to the edge are what you just mentioned, computer vision. So I mean, vision-based use cases like, inspection, people detection, theft prevention, and retail are computer vision-centric use cases. So we see that. The other big one is robotic-based use cases, like where you have a robotic arm or you have an AMR or some kind of self-driving forklift type or self-driving tractor. So we all see those as robotic use cases because that autonomous device has to sense, perceive, decide, and act, right? So that we call them robotic use cases. And then the other one is agentic use cases. So a lot of enterprises now are thinking of how do we deploy more agents, and some of these agents absolutely can be deployed in cloud controlled environments. But now with the advent of small language models and things that can fit on smaller compute nodes, that they become more purpose-built agents they can deploy at the edge. So I would say there's three different areas on how we see these use cases kind of starting to bubble up.
What about just simple ones like in retail? Like I always say the one at a small store, there's cameras watching shoplifters or safety for outside the stores, and they're all relying on video analytics and so on. And those, do they go back to the main cloud, or they are processed very locally first and remove some of that noise?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on what you're doing with that model. What is it? What are you actually detecting or respecting? If you're doing theft prevention, then that has to be locally processed because you need to let the shopkeeper know immediately that is something that's happening, or the security guard or whoever. Immediately, you need an immediate decision whether to act, not to act. But if you're just doing, how many people went into my store, people counting, where do they dwell in the aisles and what items were they looking at, then that data can be meta tagged and sent. Those tags can be sent to the cloud, and then they can be analyzed. And doesn't have to be in real time. So it really is use case dependent on what is it that you want to act on or identify, and if it's in real time versus type of response, it has to be on-prem typically.
And, I went to the NVIDIA conference, and it just was last month or so.
Right.
I can't remember. It feels, time goes by so fast. Anyways, it was a really amazing conference, and I was really amazed in great keynotes and great tracks everywhere. What was really incredibly exciting for me was Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, talked about, one is for telcos making the radio access networks all AI based on NVIDIA chipsets, right? That was one big theme. But the second one he talked about was GPU as a service, right? And really, I think he said like 10 major partners that deploying it now. Can you talk a little more? What is GPU as a service, and what are the opportunities for the telcos to really start deploying that and using that technology?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. The GTC conference that you're referring to, I think for your listeners who have attended that, one of the things you probably saw is the large ecosystem that comes together to enable AI applications. So to answer your question about GPU as a service, yes, we have we're working with different providers that are doing that. I think in this collaboration that we have with MEF, it allows sort of this, like I mentioned earlier, democratization of AI, where it makes it accessible to others. Right now, there seems to be for a variety of reasons, people don't have readily access to GPU resources. Even when you get, even if you go to a hyperscaler and you say, well, I need, our GB200s, I need instance of those, then there's a queue to get that, right? Because there's a lot of people that are leveraging that infrastructure. Having a GPU as a service where you can get access to those, accelerated computing resources to be able to build your application, run your use cases, is a key feature that most enterprises want to have, especially as they're experimenting. They probably want to use that type of service before they make a large capital investment or a large contract investment to see how will this work for me or not. I think the AI will definitely work. That I think they're trying to make a determination of the TCO of the infrastructure. And I think providing that GPU available makes it more accessible to smaller businesses. Like I said, companies that may not have that skill set or infrastructure to do that. The other part of it is, I think you probably heard, is that a scalable AI infrastructure is key. The people from a security and dependability and access standpoint. And very few companies are building that on their own. They can, right? And some of there's examples of OpenAI and even was that XAI, Elon's organization, deploying 200,000 GPUs in an environment. So you can do that, but most enterprises they want to be able to have access to a dynamic way of doing that, and something that's available to them not just as a cloud instance, but maybe as an infrastructure instance that they can take advantage of in their infrastructure. The other part of it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, so let me just articulate what I think in my mind is, so telcos have a lot of edges, right? And right now we've been talking about multi-access edge compute forever. And most of that was thought about from a compute level of IaaS, right? And now we see the emergence of AI just explode, and they need to run on GPUs. And specifically, NVIDIA owns 97% of the market today. And what I'm hearing is there's a great revenue opportunity with all those edge assets. And enterprises wants to load models on the edges for low latencies. And also it's secure, right? Because you talked about, they own the networks, telcos own the networks. They can secure them. If they can allow models to exist on their edges, there's revenue opportunity, correct? And I think there's a demand for it, what you're hearing, because enterprises need that, or they don't have to find how to put their own edge box somewhere, right? And that's not necessarily always practical. First, in the building, they can control it, but sometimes they need it more in the geographical area, like specifically in a state or a city. Or can you help our listeners with that? Is that true?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to do is making AI fundamental part of the network fabric, right? Just like your service providers are providing bandwidth and compute, we want to be able to provide AI services. That becomes their potentially a new revenue stream that they can provide, high value AI powered services for their customers, and enabling that would enable different things. I think that's ultimately that's the goal. Now, I guess my question would be, the service providers are, what are the capabilities of being able to do that? And I think the services that you provide is providing a reference architecture with standard APIs. Standardization becomes a big part of how you can build confidence with enterprises who are trying to take advantage of a service like a GPU as a service, and for service providers to build it consistently, so that there's confidence in being able to use those services. Right? I think that would be a great help.
Yeah, I think we'll talk more about what we demonstrated together at Mobile World Congress, which demonstrated all these ideas, and I'll talk about that at the very end, maybe for the listeners. But I just want to build up to that so that the story comes in correctly. So there's edge. The providers own a lot of edge. There's ability to make a lot of revenue off those edges, just like they make on their networks. Now they're bolting cybersecurity into their networks. Now they can bolt in all of these edge, AI-ready kind of nodes, right? And you talked about working with some of the hardware guys that build these MECs, and I won't put names out there because I want to be sensitive. How do they actually take and get these nodes in there? Because if they're going to have to be thinking multi-tenancy, they can't have a big, huge rack in a small, confined center. So how is that practical? Of course, there's a CPE edge, which a lot of the providers own. Can they actually invoke very small models there? At the CPE edge, that's one with white boxes, or even with big vendor names that we know. And also their POPs have the ability, but they're not huge like data centers. So I think that's a little bit of a grapple to figure out. How have you thought through that?
I mean, I think I hate to say, but it depends, right? It really depends on what type of services that service provider wants to provide. They can provide small models that allow them to do like your example you brought in earlier with the computer vision, looking at a retail store, a small retail store, to be able to provide that service to the small retail store, and they can do that with a very small compute node. But if they want to provide an example of video search and summarization, like for example you're looking at a traffic light stop, and they want to be able to say, well, how many pedestrians have crossed this crosswalk over the last 3 days? That's what we call an inference microservice. It's like a little agent that is monitoring the video for you and then creating a summary of that in real time, right? But that compute node may require a couple of servers to be able to do that, to do that level of service. So it really depends on and that's may or may not be latency sensitive, because you can do that. You're actually capturing the video recording for the last 2 or 3 days, and it's doing a search against that. So it's not real time. So it doesn't have to be at the far edge. It could be at the near edge or at the POP, right, as you mentioned.
And I think what you enlightened me was there's the idea that I will give you like IaaS, I'll give you a GPU infrastructure that you can load whatever models you want, Mr. Enterprise or customer. That's probably not as practical as what we showed the demo, and I'll come to it in a second, which is I own the edge, I'm the telco, I own the edge, meaning the telco, and I'm going to load a model very specific that I think is going to be in big demand. So now not only they going to have their edges, monetized, but they're going to put models, very specific models that they can now make money off. So now it becomes not just GPU as a service and it's an infrastructure. I'm going to enable GPUs, then put specific models that need the telco is going to then be a channel for these ISVs and their models. And I will provide the GPU services on my edges with specific multi-access edge compute boxes. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think that's the demo. That's exactly. I mean, I think that is the evolution that I think that service providers can get to. If they can provide a service, not the GPU as a service, but the actual service, like, in a retail store, to be able to give that retail owner an analysis of here in this day, so many people went to your store, 20% of them actually bought something, the others didn't. The ones that didn't looked at these types of products more, but then didn't buy. And then, you can provide a summary of the report that becomes a service, not the GPU, because you're actually providing that as a service then, right? So that, you're right. I think the question is, if you provide an infrastructure, then the onus of creating solutions on the enterprise or your customers to be able to build a model or provide a model. And you can provide I think you can also provide a marketplace for different ISVs that have different services, but then it's the implementation onus is still on the customer. But if you're providing a complete service as an offer, then there's probably higher take if you analyze the market that you want to play in, potentially, right? I think what you were describing.
And we demonstrated this in Mobile World Congress, this exact idea. And I think, you came up with the computer vision company, and we'll talk about that at the very end here. But I think now what you're saying is that ability also gives even further opportunity. Like, just take the example of tracking cameras, because more importantly, even now they say I'm going to take specific models, specific use case like retail or traffic management and so on. And they're saying, Mr. Customer, you don't have to worry about it. I'll take care of that. Now they have to attach peripheral sensors to it, cameras and IoT devices and all kinds of things. And so now there's an opportunity for like AI connectivity back to that model, right? So think about the cameras in the streets and all that have to be brought back. And so a lot of times they have 5G. A lot of these providers have 5G. They have Wi-Fi in cities. They have, they have all kinds of connectivity options from the providers. So now providers can also bring in all of that connectivity into a very business network that at the wired side that then connects directly to the model. So is that another opportunity as they go down this path?
Absolutely. And I think that the question is now, if a service provider goes after that type of opportunity, can the service provider, be the prime integrator for that? Or do they partner with an ecosystem that knows how to do that, like a global service provider, like a GSI, like an Accenture and a Deloitte, et cetera, or a WWT and others, right? And an ISV that provides the model, and then they package that as a service for the city. So that I think, there's many ways to cut this. The key is, having this allows you to leverage the service provider's infrastructure in a way that can create these new services or make it available for the enterprise. You probably know more about that on what that could be than I do. But from a enablement standpoint, NVIDIA can provide the hardware. We provide the software. We provide the pre-trained models. We can provide examples and blueprints on how to do this so that it makes it easier to implement as much as possible.
I think you said that brilliantly. So it now becomes not just the telco having to get the expertise. They can partner with you, NVIDIA. And I was shocked when I looked at NVIDIA's. What you've done brilliant, NVIDIA, is not only enable the chipset, which anybody can do, but you enable all that software, the platform, and then the ecosystem. When I looked at your ISV ecosystem of models, I think for thousands and thousands, right?
I'm just going to boast a little bit, 40,000, different vendors. And then we have more than 6 million now developers developing on CUDA and our SDKs. So the ability for enterprises and service provider to access expertise to be able to bring to build these solutions is available out there.
So now what I'm saying, this is actually very brilliant. So 40,000 models, is that you just heard that?
40,000 ISV and ecosystem partners that are out there building solutions on NVIDIA.
So they could all be part of delivering with the system integrators we'll talk about in a second. They can bring in these models, very specific. I'm not going to bring 40,000, but very specific ones they think their customers want, bring that into their edges, run it, operate it, and then partner with a system integrator, GSI, to then actually work and who's very knowledgeable in one specific area or a couple of models or specific verticals. And then they don't have to provide that expertise. They can partner with the GSI. So the ecosystem comes together very brilliantly, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly, yeah.
And that's the opportunity for the telcos ahead.
And that is the opportunity, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really, and we actually demonstrated this. Now we'll cut at the end. At Mobile World Congress, we demonstrated exactly this. So, so I think what we showed, and correct me if I'm wrong, we showed that thanks to Infosys, one of our GSIs, they took our APIs facing the enterprise, and basically enterprise said, I want to load, I need GPU and I need a model at this location. And they basically talked about the location and what kind of requirements and GPUs like tensor cores and memory and so on, and clock speeds. And then basically said, okay, load it, install it, and it got installed on a white box with your chipset, and then loaded in Iron Yen's computer vision model. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's a very vertical model around traffic management. And then additionally, it needed sensors from 5G to take those traffic cameras and everything in, right? And in some cases wired, sometimes not wireless. But that got put in the model very close to the edge at that. And then the model was showing the pedestrians and the vehicle traffic management and some predictions and so on. That's kind of what we're talking about, correct?
That's right. A lot of these ISVs have very sophisticated systems already built, right? And in different industries, the industries like retail and some degree manufacturing, but also smart spaces, are purchaser of these pre-built solutions, right? There's some industries would like to build their own applications, so they may be opting more for a GPU as a service and provide that. But there's others that are saying, no, I don't want to build it myself. I just want to leverage something that's already out there. And that's very low hanging fruit. And that's a huge market for that.
And the good news is they can just partner with NVIDIA with the 40,000 ISVs and figure out what they want. And you've got all the framework, you got all, you're doing this all over the world for enterprises all over. And now the telcos can take their edge, monetize their edge, put in the GPUs they needed, put very vertical specific application use cases, work with GSIs, partner with that, and now make their bandwidth relevant, which have now added cybersecurity, and now they're adding an AI on it for specific use cases. And on top of it, they have the ability to take their cybersecurity to out secure those models too, because that's a big deal.
That is a very big deal, because I think you're hitting on a very good point, because enterprises, the large enterprises have a huge IT staff. They can do all of that capability, building the AI models, securing it. But a lot of people may miss, the security aspects of our models. Now, we have a lot of capability built into our hardware and software, but there's got to be somebody who actually, creates the right policies and procedures to be able to take advantage of all of those. So, if you already have practices around that, that is a huge value to these customers, because they may not have that.
Well, Irfan, I think we could go on forever and ever, because it's such a fascinating topic. And we're already at, I think, 25 minutes here on this episode, which I know we could probably go for an hour, but we probably have to do part 2, which is just a whole education about all of this, because the world is so enamored about with AI right now. It's on everybody's top of mind. They just all want to know more and more and more. And thank you for taking the time here. And I think it's such an interesting episode, and I really enjoy working with you, and it's going to be a really fun ride. So
thank you, Pascal.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today, share online, and review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.